So good afternoon, everyone. I know all of you are entering the room right now, and I'm Audrey Russo, President and CEO of the Pittsburgh Technology Council. And I think today marks 125 interviews that we've done since the beginning of COVID. So I want to thank you all for being here with us today. And Jonathan Kirsting is with us as usual. He is the Vice President of all things media and marketing. He's going to be managing the chat and making sure that we have an opportunity for people to exchange questions. So we're very thrilled about our guest today, but before I jump right in with our guest, I just want to give a shout out to Huntington Bank, who's been with us all along this journey during COVID, as well as the work we've done on Tech Vibe Radio. They are very active in the business community, and it provided a lot of support for those people who were looking for and needed government assistance during the onset of COVID. So we're thrilled to have them as our partners. And I also want to extend appreciation to AT&T. They have been joining us through much of our public policy and government relations work, and they have been very active right at the onset in making sure that we are eradicating the digital divide, which we saw immensely in terms of the bifurcation of the community, particularly as kids return to school, with school being at home. So they've been tremendous partners. So I mentioned that this is 125th session of Business as Usual. We launched this at the beginning of the pandemic. I only thought we would do this for 2 weeks. Little did I know that here we are approaching 6 months, and we are continuing to be pretty much booked with guests and people who are just at the forefront of making sure that the lives of those of us that are, working in tech and working across the community, we're providing you with relevant information. And today is another great example of that, so we're pretty thrilled. So we've muted your microphone, and we also have a chat. So ask questions in there. Jonathan will keep his eye on that to make sure that we have a chance to do that. So we have today Paul Mango. He is no stranger to the Pittsburgh business community and nor to the membership of the Pittsburgh Technology Council. So I'm going to welcome to the program Paul, and I mentioned that you are more than familiar with Pittsburgh. Today you are serving as Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and are in a very important position relative to the current pandemic. But before we talk about Operation Warp Speed, how about we just take a minute for you to describe your background and the journey that you've been on professionally, having arrived at AHS, and then we can talk about your current role. So welcome, thank you.
Sure, well, thanks Audrey. It's great to always interact with folks in Pittsburgh. I haven't been there nearly as much since the beginning of the year as I would have hoped. My wife is back there. Many of you probably know my wife, Dawn Rucker. She has a different last name, but she's very active in Pittsburgh technology and has made a lot of contributions there. But so I got to Pittsburgh in 1988, came there with McKinsey & Company. Had never been to the city before, so it was a pleasant surprise. And like anyone else at McKinsey, we thought we'd stay a couple years and move on, but now it's been 32 years or so, and we love it. Just by way of background, I grew up in upstate New York. I went off to West Point to the military academy. Dawn's also a graduate of the military academy. That's where we met. Spent 5 years in the service here in the US, in the 82nd Airborne Division, then over in Germany for a couple years. So we lived overseas, and then I went straight to Harvard Business School. And then I joined McKinsey. I left McKinsey for a couple years and great scientists in Pittsburgh at the Institute for Transfusion Medicine, which has a close research relationship with University of Pittsburgh. And then went back to McKinsey and we built a big healthcare practice. I spent the bulk of my career there. In 2017, I call it my midlife crisis. I actually became a candidate for governor in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Right. My wife, it could have been worse than that. But I had a great time as a candidate. But shortly after I lost the primary, Secretary Azar called because I'd known him. Obviously, we're both in healthcare for a very long time. I'd known him since 2006, and he said, "Hey, really sorry about the primary, but why don't you come on down and help us out? We need a lot of help down here." So I started out in the summer 2018 as the Chief of Staff of the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And then about 14 months ago, July of 2019, he asked me to come up and serve in the current role as Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy. Little did each of us know that, on the day we returned from our Christmas break on January 3rd, Bob Redfield at the CDC called and said, I think there's something going on in China. And that was, like I said, that was January 3rd, and this is whatever, September 17th, and I don't know where the last 9 months went. I did spend about, 12 or 13 weeks straight every day over at FEMA. FEMA was the lead agency for a while on this, so we were closely coordinating. And I tell my wife it's the longest time that since 1979 that I didn't see her. So it was literally like close to 14 weeks. And then I know today's topic is very much about Operation Warp Speed. When that came about in the springtime, the secretary asked me to be kind of his primary liaison to that effort, which is a joint venture between HHS and Department of Defense. So that's what we've been doing for the last, Operation Warp Speed's been around since about the middle of May. And it is moving, as I've said to many folks externally, it is moving at warp speed. So I'm very happy to talk about it today. So that's a bit about me. And I should mention, I always put this last for some reason, but I do have 5 daughters also, all of whom are Steelers fans, and one of whom is left in Western Pennsylvania, but they all love it as well.
That's great. Thank you so much. Yes. So we're gonna dive into this. So many of us and our members have been closely following Operation Warp Speed, but for those who haven't, here's what it is said on the website. So tell me if this is correct. It's Warp Speed, OWS, aims to deliver 300 million doses of a safe, effective vaccine for COVID-19 by January 2021 as part of a broader strategy to accelerate the development, manufacturing, and distribution of COVID-19 vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics, collectively known as countermeasures. So the question is, hearing this and hearing this goal and knowing that we've never approved a vaccine faster than 4 years, and usually the approval process is probably 7 years, at least one journalist described this as inarguably the most ambitious scientific endeavor undertaken in recent American history. So barring the moonshot program, which we're big fans of, I tend to agree with that. So in terms of the stated goals, development of a safe vaccine, ramping up manufacturing of 300 million doses, and preparing for distribution, how are we doing? How are we doing that?
Yeah.
Give us a status.
Yeah, so and I always preface these comments by saying, when it comes to science, nothing is certain. So things could change tomorrow, things could change next week, but barring that, things are going extremely well. And a little bit about how Operation Warp Speed came together. As you mentioned, Audrey, it is, if you think about it, there's 3 vertical aspects to it. There's vaccines, there's therapeutics, there's diagnostics, but there's also 3 horizontal aspects to it from an organizational standpoint. It's a matrix, and those 3 are research and development is 1, manufacturing is 2, and the 3rd one is distribution and administration. And there's been a lot in the news on the last 24 hours about distribution and administration, because yesterday we released our strategy and our plan and our playbook for the states on distribution and administration. Early on, what we did was attract literally the most successful vaccine developer in the world. His name is Monsef Slaoui. He spent a lot of his career with GlaxoSmithKline, I believe. He has successfully brought 14 vaccines to market, including Shingrix. So any of us who are over 50, I'll make a plug to go get your shingles vaccine. It's about 99% effective, one of the most successful vaccines ever. Monsef developed that. So just to put it in perspective, we were able to attract literally the best vaccine developer in the world. He has a counterpart, Carlo Di Notari Stefani, who's been 35 years in manufacturing in the industry. And we have some of the best scientists as well. Obviously, Tony Fauci is deeply involved, Francis Collins from the NIH. We have a guy named Matt Hepburn who came from DARPA and DOD. who was a vaccine, kind of an immunologist type of guy. And we have the DoD itself. So Gus Perna, 4-star general, ran the Defense Logistics Agency, effectively is now full-time assigned to Operation Warp Speed. So we pulled all that together. We set criteria for success, and we launched it. It started with about 114 vaccine candidates. That was whittled down to about a dozen or so, maybe a little bit more than a dozen. And then we have invested in 6 vaccines across 3 different technology platforms. The messenger RNA platform, which is relatively new, the viral vector platforms, which have been around a while, and then the protein subunit platform. So 6 of them, and it's very intentional that we did that. It's a portfolio strategy that places a lot of bets, so to speak, with some of the best companies in the world, as you've probably read. Pfizer is one of them, Johnson & Johnson is one of them, AstraZeneca is one, Novavax, as I said, GSK, Sanofi is one, and then a relatively new company named Moderna. And 3 of those are in, 3 of those vaccines as of today are in phase 3 clinical trials with a temporary halt on the AstraZeneca one because they had a problem with a patient in the UK. Right. We expect that 2 more of those will be in phase 3 trials within the next 4 weeks, and then 1 will come after that. But just to put this into perspective, it's already, Operation Warp Speed is already setting a number of records. So from the time of the identification of the virus to the first phase 1 trial starting was 43 days. From the time of the identification of the virus to the time the first phase 3 trial started was somewhere between 6 and 7 months. So there's a lot being done where everything used to be done in sequence. Now it's being done in parallel. So we are actually funding and supporting the advanced trials, but we're setting all those up before the companies are even done with phase 1 trials. So they can move literally on the day after they get approval, they can move into the next phase. We are already what's called manufacturing at risk. There are millions of doses of vaccines already manufactured today as we speak. We have no idea whether the vaccines are going to be safe and effective yet. But the intent is, and you probably read about it yesterday, that upon FDA approval for, let's say, an emergency use authorization, within 24 hours, people will be getting vaccinated all over the country. So that's never been done before. And you can think about it as most pharmaceutical companies would not take that risk. They would not take the risk of manufacturing, investing billions of dollars in manufacturing before they knew they had a good product. Right. We can do that. And it's kind of the beauty of Operation Warp Speed is that the return on the investment to the United States as a society is so much greater than that return on investment would be to any pharmaceutical company of having a safe and effective vaccine, that it was a very good investment for us. So Secretary Mnuchin would say, in March and April, every day the economy was shut down, cost us $40 billion in GDP. If you say the federal government takes in about 20% of GDP in terms of taxes, you can do the math. That's $8 billion a day. And Operation Warp Speed will cost us somewhere between 3 and 4 days of the economy being shut down in terms of tax revenue. So if we can cut off a year or 18 months or 2 years from what would have happened, it's an enormous return on investment, not even to mention the number of lives it'll save. But just from an economic standpoint, I think we could say that we are being great stewards of the taxpayers' dollars in a way that the individual companies could not assume that risk. So where are we right now with this? As I mentioned, these phase 3 trials are being evaluated by a completely independent body known as Data and Safety Monitoring Boards. For those of you who are researchers, you probably understand that. We do not have any access to what is happening in terms of case accrual. In terms of enrollment, it's going very well. Pfizer has already exceeded its 30,000, initial 30,000. You have Moderna, which is getting very close to that number. So that's another record, which is having enrolled close to 60,000 persons in phase 3 clinical trials. And remember, really it was effectively August 1st before these trials opened. So we're saying within 6 weeks, we have 60,000 persons in phase 3 clinical trials. that doesn't really matter when you talk to MONSEF. What matters is how many cases are being generated out of those. And we did the best we could. We get daily data on hospitalizations due to COVID. And we get daily data on testing results for COVID. And in the last couple of weeks, we're doing about 750,000 COVID tests a day. So we can see by county where those are coming in, which ones are positive. So the name of the game is to set up the clinical trial sites in places that have the largest outbreaks. And while the president and Dr. Birx and everyone else, and we're all hoping we have fewer and fewer cases, if you're a researcher in a phase 3 clinical trial, the thing you want is more cases, more of an outbreak, because you have to prove that the vaccine works. And the only way you do that is you have 15,000 who have a placebo, 15,000 who have the vaccine, and you watch how many of each of those categories, each of those categories actually leads to infection. And that's where we are right now, but we have no insight into when we're going to get those data, because it's all run by a completely independent non-government body called the Data and Safety Monitoring Board. They feel there are good data, and let's say they are effective. They will send those data to the company, the sponsoring company of the trial. That company will then decide whether they think it's good enough to send to the FDA for emergency use authorization. So that's kind of where we are right now. And I think when you hear the president speak about this, he is accurate. It is possible that this could happen in October. It is more likely, because we statistically look at all these things, it is factually more likely that that will happen in November or December. It is highly unlikely it would happen anytime after that, meaning we are, with all our probability analyses, we know it's going to be sometime in October, November, or December. So we feel really good about that. So I'll just pause with that. Hopefully.
No, that's great. That's great. That sets the table. We have so many questions. I want Jonathan to pick a few out just to ask them, and so we can get engagement. People are passionate, as you know.
Absolutely. First and foremost, just the one that just popped up right now. People want to get involved with this. They want to be helpful. How can they get in touch with Operation Warp Speed? There's many of us here who can help with the effort to make sure enough pharmaceutical glass is available, but can't get through. So is there a way for people to get through?
Yeah, and Justine is in my office. Justine, could you get the website for, there is a website, a single website for enrollment in clinical trials. And we haven't talked too much about therapeutics, but there are a number of tremendously exciting therapeutics. In fact, I think University of Pittsburgh yesterday mentioned or announced, or the day before, about one of their antibodies, which is early, but also exciting. But there's a whole bevy of therapeutics that we have going through clinical trials with the NIH as well. But to answer the question directly, the one area where we feel we're not doing as well as we would like to do is minority recruiting into clinical trials for vaccines. So particularly African Americans. We want 10% minimum in our trials, and we're running, 7 or 8%. I know that sounds like a small difference, but we don't want the FDA to hold up the trial because we were unsuccessful at getting enough African Americans in there. As you know, they have been disproportionately affected by COVID, mainly due to, we've done some analysis. Sickle cell is something that really complicates this disease. Obviously, a number of underlying conditions and so forth. So that is an area that, if anyone could help there, enrolling, and we don't just need young, healthy African Americans. Unfortunately, what we need in the trial is older African Americans with underlying conditions.
What if someone has technology or supplies or something like that? Would that be a way they can help as well too?
I'm sorry, say again.
If any of our members have technologies or supplies that might be useful to the operation, can they be useful?
That we feel pretty good about. We have, for better or for worse, exercised a lot of Defense Production Act authorities. We are flying equipment in from all over the world that would take 6 weeks on a ship, and we're getting it in 24 hours through air transport. We've procured over 1 billion needles, syringes, because these vaccines, we don't know which one is going to be a winner or which ones are going to be winners. And some of them have different gauge needles, different size syringes. We've procured vials. we actually feel from a industrial response, U.S. Industrial-based response, we are in very, very good shape. And we've established 25 manufacturing facilities to include fill and finish all over the country in a very short period of time. So that we feel good about. It is minority recruiting where we feel less good.
So before we go into it, just another question, I want to ask you something. That Dr. Fauci talked about the importance of the widespread adoption of the vaccine once it's cleared the regulatory process. And, well-educated and well-informed people have serious worries about that speed. So we've talked a little bit about that. Can you react to that? And then we'll jump to some questions.
Yeah, I think the couple things. One is, again, I'm getting this from Dr. Slaoui, but a typical vaccine clinical trial might have 8,000 or 10,000 persons in it. We have 6 of them going that will have 30,000, minimum of 30,000. One of our candidates is going to actually have 60,000 in it. So this is unprecedented in terms of the number of persons who will be in clinical trials. So that gives us some comfort, number one. Number two is, as I said, it is neither the president nor the secretary nor Dr. Slaoui has any influence on what the Data and Safety Monitoring Board does. They make a completely independent decision on data. They have statisticians, they have experts, scientists, and so forth. So they will not make a recommendation or release the data unless they think it is either really good or really bad. They could say, shut this down. They could say, shut this trial down right now. There's no sense in giving it to anyone else. That's obviously, we hope they don't say that. So I think that should give some people some comfort. And, I've been here a couple of years. I have the highest regard for our colleagues at the FDA and the ones who are running the Center for Biologics, which would, Peter Marks in particular, who is going to wind up, his team is going to wind up saying yes or no on these things. He's a career official who's been there a long time, who has extraordinarily high integrity, and he won't be bullied. I can guarantee that. So I would take the vaccine as soon as it came out. And we have a pretty, and we'll have a pretty aggressive campaign, communications campaign that we're going to ramp up. I mean, we've already been doing it, but we'll ramp it up more to give people comfort. The only caveat is that the only reason you haven't seen kind of general PSA announcements and those types of things is we do not yet know how effective these vaccines will be in certain segments of the population. It is entirely possible that a vaccine could come back and say it's no good in persons over 70, but it's great if you're 25 to 60. So we don't want to get everyone so anxious and lathered up about, oh, I'm going to get my vaccine, only to learn that that particular candidate is not good in a certain population. So.
Okay, good. So Jonathan, you want to grab another question out there, please?
Yeah, some great ones here. So from Michael Nilo says, we're still currently struggling with infrastructure for proper testing and distribution of PPE. Are there any aspects of Operation Warp Speed that are aimed to overcome that?
Yeah, so let me address, because I oversee the Strategic National Stockpile as well. That's one of my roles. Let me talk about PPE first. There is a very well-defined process that should go like this. Pennsylvania has a regional representative from FEMA, okay? Every day we're tracking requests through states that come to FEMA where there are shortages of PPE. And when we get those requests, we look at our data. We get a lot of requests for things that don't make sense. We had a governor ask us for 40,000 ventilators. For only 80,000 ventilators in the entire United States. Okay, just to put it in perspective. That governor wound up using 1,200, just to put it in perspective as well. So we verify the request and say, is there an outbreak there? Like I said, we get every COVID hospitalization reported to us every day. And if we see that it's an area that's requesting stuff and there's some sense of patients, COVID patients that need it, we ship it through FEMA and you get it within 24 hours. What the purpose of the federal government is not to do is to restock the shelves of hospitals who have no COVID patients and should be buying their own PPE. So that's not the purpose of the strategic national stockpile. We save it for emergency situations. In terms of testing, we're perplexed by this because the productive capacity of US testing industry today for COVID is 3 million tests a day, and we're consuming about 750,000. So and we know that there's different technologies that take different reagents and so forth, but we are a little bit perplexed as to why anyone would say they're having trouble. We have heard spot shortages of certain reagents. We've heard spot shortages of certain swabs. We continue to have a lot of swabs in our own stockpile that are ready to be shipped. It depends on, I guess, what technology testing platforms an individual hospital has in this case, or a testing laboratory. But if anyone has any specifics, I'll be happy to pass it on to Dr. Giroir, who works right down the hallway, and get him to look at it. One thing I'll say about testing is we are in a massive kind of transformation away from laboratory-based tests to point-of-care tests. Mm-hmm. And today, what's going on in the country, a little bit over 50% of what's being manufactured is point-of-care tests. They're quicker, cheaper, and almost equally reliable, 98% sensitivity, 98% specificity. So if it's, I would just encourage whatever members are looking for laboratory testing capacity to think about point of care as the newer technologies that they might want to switch to.
So Jonathan, maybe one more question and then I have a wrap up. I know people are asking amazing questions.
It's just some really, really great stuff here. Let me pull something up here. So this is a little bit of a long one, but very interesting here from Sam Brower. So Operation Warp Speed has focused heavily on vaccine development, but diseases such as AIDS and hepatitis C have been managed with antivirals, not vaccines. Furthermore, SARS has mechanisms which evade the immune system, which makes a vaccine more of a challenge than diseases such as smallpox. Why is not more being done on the dedicated antiviral front?
Yeah, well, let me just speak a little bit more broadly. There are scores of trials going on right now for therapeutics. They're not all antivirals. Like I said, some of them are antibodies. Some of them are just coagulation. I mean, a lot of these patients are dying of blood clots. So there's Francis Collins at the NIH launched a massive kind of heparin-related study on that. There's studies going on convalescent plasma. Remdesivir antiviral, there's still a lot of studies undergoing. We've shipped probably, in the last 5 months, I'm just guessing, 1 million doses of remdesivir to US hospitals. So there's a lot of that going on. I'm just guessing 15 to 20 minimum different therapies being evaluated in general, and there's a lot of enthusiasm for them. For whatever reason, they're not getting the same attention that vaccines are getting, but big multi-billion-dollar investments in clinical trials, and actually the same thing as I mentioned with vaccines, which is procuring product before the trial is even over.
So I want to be very sensitive to your time, and there are some great questions, and we'll archive them. I don't know if we'll be able to get the responses back to the individuals, but there's lots of questions. I mean, how can a couple of things, looking at this is a global crisis, right? And how does the United States going to work to ensure that the vaccine can be distributed equitably to every corner of the planet? Yeah.
So a couple of things just to set the record straight. One is the only thing we've done is obtain licensing agreements. Many of these candidates have manufacturing agreements all over the world. We are not preventing that at all. We're not hoarding the intellectual property. We got licensing agreements to engage in manufacturing for US citizens. If all goes well, by June, July timeframe, we'll have about 2.2 billion doses of hopefully successful vaccines. So we are already going through the process with the National Security Council and the State Department as to how we can, if you will, export those. We're not going to do that prior to us having confidence that we can take care of all Americans. It's your taxpayer dollars at work here, but we feel very comfortable that by late spring, mid to late spring, we will be able to export product all over the world. And we're going to start with lower income countries, because most of the Western developed countries have manufacturing contracts, or even if they're not manufacturing, they have contracts for end product delivery from many of these companies. So we're very cognizant of that. We think it's vitally important. And by the way, there's self-interest in that, because guess how this virus got into the United States? Right. So we just soon have the whole world vaccinated and not have to worry about this again. And from a global economic standpoint and so forth, we want to do that. So that planning is underway. And think about it as middle to late spring. We are keeping our fingers crossed, but we hope to be exporting a lot of product.
So how can our members and people who are on this call, how can we support Operation Warp Speed?
Well, I think it's great that we're exposing the group to, the facts, so to speak. I think to talk about it as you mentioned, as a scientific achievement that is nearly unparalleled rather than a political event, because it's not. I think to continue to promote the fact that there are tremendous safety gates that these vaccines have to go through before they will be in widespread use. I mean, now almost 60,000 Americans already have been injected with them. By the way, zero safety incidents. Thus, because we heard about that right away. We don't know the effectiveness yet, but we do know it looks like they are pretty darn safe. Knock on wood there. And then I think with the minority recruiting. So I think promoting right. Vaccines, the minority recruiting. Unfortunately, Western Pennsylvania is not in a big outbreak situation. So having African Americans from Western Pennsylvania will not really help us much on the trials, but elsewhere they will, if your companies extend out to different parts of the country. I think those 2 or 3 things would be very valuable and very much appreciated.
Listen, we have extended our time. I know that your time is precious. We can't thank you enough for sharing with us, getting an inside view in terms of what's happening. It matters. Your work matters to each and every one of us, and I can't thank you. There are a lot of questions that are out there. We'll share that with your team. If there's a way for them to get answered, we will make that happen. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I think this is helpful. It gives us, as Eileen has just said, this puts into context better than sound bites that we hear on all the different pieces of news and social media these days. And that's really important. And that's what we try to do through the work here at the Tech Council. And thank you for carrying the flag for Southwestern Pennsylvania.
Yep, absolutely.
Your wife has done a lot of great work. Someone referenced the work she's done with Girls of Steel. And I know there's numerous other things she's been involved in. So we will share the webpage with everyone so that they can get involved and they can be cheerleaders for this work. And we will stay connected with you, Paul. Thank you so much for your work. Sure. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Brian Kennedy, for making sure that this event happened today. And thanks to Huntington Bank and AT&T for being our partners over the long haul. So great. Stay safe, Paul.
Okay, great. Best regards, everyone in Southwestern PA.
Thanks.
Okay, bye-bye.